3 days before I was fined $820 for running an unauthorized business out of my home. The biggest problem in my life was deciding whether I wanted regular coffee or dark roast. That's what made the whole thing so ridiculous. One minute, I was a guy working quietly from a spare bedroom. The next, I was apparently some kind of criminal entrepreneur threatening the peace and stability of an entire neighborhood. At least that's what my HOA wanted everyone to believe. My name is Ethan Walker, and at the time I lived in a neighborhood called Willow Creek Estates, one of those carefully manicured suburban communities outside Columbus, Ohio, where every mailbox looked the same, every lawn seemed suspiciously perfect, and every neighbor smiled just a little longer than normal. You know the type. Everything looked friendly on the surface, but underneath there was always somebody watching, somebody measuring, somebody waiting for a reason to complain. My wife Rachel used to joke that our neighborhood Facebook group had more surveillance than the local police department. I laughed whenever she said it. Turns out she wasn't kidding. I worked remotely for a software company based in Minneapolis. Every morning I'd walk upstairs with a cup of coffee, sit at an oak desk facing a large window, answer emails, attend meetings, and spend most of the day staring at spreadsheets and project reports. No customers. No employees. No inventory. No signs in the yard. No delivery trucks lined up outside. Nothing that any reasonable person would ever call a business. For nearly 4 years, nobody cared. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I opened my mailbox and found a white envelope with bright red lettering across the front. Notice of violation. Even before opening it, I had a bad feeling. HOA letters never contained good news. Inside was a formal notice accusing me of operating an unauthorized commercial enterprise from my residence. I actually laughed out loud when I read it. Rachel was in the kitchen making dinner and looked over at me. "What's so funny?" she asked. I handed her the letter. She read it once, then twice, then looked at me with the same confused expression I felt. "Commercial enterprise?" she said. "What exactly are you selling up there? Spreadsheet subscriptions?" I remember laughing again because honestly that was about as absurd as the accusation itself. The letter claimed multiple residents had reported excessive business activity associated with my property. According to the complaint, there was frequent commercial traffic, regular deliveries, increased vehicle activity, and ongoing disturbances inconsistent with residential use. I stood there staring at those words thinking maybe they had sent this to the wrong address. But my name was right there at the top. My address too. The fine attached to the violation was $400, payable within 14 days. Failure to comply would result in additional penalties. The next morning I called the HOA office. A woman named Denise Harper answered. Denise had been the community manager for years. She always sounded like she was reading from a script. "Mr. Walker," she said after pulling up my file, "multiple complaints were submitted regarding commercial activity occurring at your residence." "What commercial activity?" I asked. "I'm a remote employee. Residents reported delivery vehicles arriving almost daily. Those are groceries. Lights remain on throughout business hours. Because I'm working, there appears to be continuous office activity. Because I have an office." There was a long pause. Then she said something that still amazes me. "The board believes your activities may violate community standards regarding home-based businesses." May violate. Not did violate. May violate. Somehow that uncertainty didn't stop them from issuing a fine. After hanging up, I dug through the HOA rulebook. It was 117 pages of regulations covering everything from fence colors to holiday decorations. Eventually, I found the section about businesses. It prohibited commercial operations that generated customer traffic, created noise disturbances, employed non-residents, or altered the residential character of the community. None of that described my situation. Not even close. I felt annoyed, but not worried. Surely this was a misunderstanding that would be cleared up quickly. I sent an email explaining my employment situation and attached a letter from my company confirming that I worked remotely as a salaried employee. A week passed. Then another letter arrived. This time the fine had doubled. Late fees had been added. The total was now $820. Along with the new balance was a demand that I provide proof I was not operating a business. I remember sitting at my kitchen table staring at that sentence while something shifted inside me. Up until that moment, I thought they were confused. Now I realized something else was happening. They weren't asking me to prove I was innocent because they believed I was guilty. They were asking because they'd already decided I was guilty and expected me to surrender. What I didn't know yet was that someone on that HOA board had a very personal reason for targeting me, and before this was over, their own records were going to expose everything. The more I thought about that second letter, the less sense it made. I wasn't being accused of doing something that resembled a business. I was being accused of existing during business hours. My computer was on, my lights were on, groceries occasionally showed up at my front door, and somehow that had been transformed into evidence. For a couple of days I went back and forth with myself. Part of me wanted to pay the fine just to make the headache disappear. $820 wasn't going to bankrupt me. But another part of me kept coming back to the same question. If I paid this, what stopped them from doing it again next month? Or to someone else? Rachel could see I was getting frustrated. One evening she set a plate of food in front of me and said, "You're not angry about the money." She was right. I wasn't. What bothered me was the feeling that somebody had looked at a perfectly ordinary life and decided to invent a violation because they could. 2 days later, I called an attorney named Marcus Hale. Marcus specialized in property disputes and HOA cases. He was one of those lawyers who never raised his voice because he never needed to. The first time we met, he listened to my entire story without interrupting once. Then he leaned back in his chair and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a guy gets when he spots a weakness in someone's defense. "Tell me something," he said. "Do you know whether any board members work from home?" I shrugged. "No idea." Marcus nodded slowly. "Let's find out." That was the beginning of everything. The following week, Marcus submitted a formal records request. He requested enforcement records, violation histories, board meeting minutes, complaint logs, correspondence related to business use restrictions, and every enforcement action involving alleged commercial activity during the previous 5 years. The HOA wasn't happy. In fact, they fought the request almost immediately. They delayed responses, claimed certain records weren't readily available, asked why we needed specific documents. Marcus seemed delighted every time they pushed back. "When people hide information," he told me, "it's usually because the information matters." 3 weeks later, several boxes of documents arrived. I still remember sitting in Marcus's office surrounded by stacks of paper while he flipped through records with the patience of an archaeologist digging through ancient ruins. Most of it was boring. Meeting agendas, landscaping contracts, budget reports. Then Marcus stopped turning pages. "Well," he said quietly, "that's interesting." He handed me a file. The first name belonged to a board member named Cheryl Benson. Cheryl was one of the loudest supporters of strict HOA enforcement. According to neighborhood gossip, she never missed an opportunity to lecture people about preserving property values. According to the documents in front of us, she also operated a private business consulting firm from her home. Not remotely worked. Operated. She had a registered LLC, client meetings conducted virtually, business advertising, and documented revenue. No violation notices. No fines. No warnings. Marcus opened another folder. This one belonged to another board member named Lisa Merrick. Lisa sold custom jewelry online. Thousands of transactions over several years. Packages shipped almost daily. Delivery pickups occurring several times each week. Again, no violations. No enforcement. No complaints. Then came a third board member. A tax preparation specialist who met clients virtually and occasionally in person. Once again, absolutely nothing in the record suggested any enforcement action. I remember staring at those files feeling equal parts shocked and furious. "So let me get this straight," I said. "The people accusing me of running a business are actually running businesses." Marcus smiled again. "Welcome to selective enforcement." The deeper we dug, the stranger things became. Meeting minutes revealed repeated discussions about remote work after the pandemic. Multiple board members had openly acknowledged that many residents now worked from home. In one meeting, a board member even stated that remote employment should not be considered commercial activity because it created no meaningful impact on the neighborhood. Yet somehow that logic only applied when discussing everyone except me. The question was why. Then we found something that explained a lot. About 8 months earlier, I had voted against a proposal championed by the HOA president, Sandra Holloway. Sandra wasn't just the president. She was the kind of person who treated disagreement as a personal attack. During a community meeting, she had pushed for a costly landscaping project that would have increased dues significantly. I spoke against it. So did several neighbors. The proposal failed. According to emails included in the record's request, Sandra had privately complained afterward that certain residents were becoming obstacles to community progress. My name appeared more than once. Nothing overtly illegal. Nothing dramatic. But enough to reveal a pattern. I wasn't being targeted because of a business. I was being targeted because somebody on the board remembered a disagreement and decided to make an example out of me. Marcus noticed the same thing. You don't have to prove retaliation, he said. Selective enforcement is already enough. But if a judge starts connecting dots, that's not going to help them. Then came the piece that changed everything. Marcus started reviewing city ordinances governing home-based businesses. One afternoon he called me and told me to come to his office immediately. When I arrived, he slid a printed document across the desk. I read it once, then again, then a third time just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The ordinance was crystal clear. Remote employment performed for an outside company, without customer visits, without inventory, without public-facing business operations, was specifically excluded from the legal definition of a home-based business. Not implied, not suggested, explicitly excluded. In other words, the very activity the HOA had fined me for wasn't considered a business under local law at all. Marcus leaned back and folded his arms. They're done, he said. They just don't know it yet. The hearing was scheduled for the following month. During the weeks leading up to it, the HOA continued acting as though they held all the cards. Additional letters arrived. More demands. More warnings about future penalties. Every notice seemed designed to pressure me into giving up. Instead, every new letter went straight into a folder Marcus labeled Exhibit A. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. Not because I was worried about losing. At that point, the evidence was overwhelming. What kept me awake was wondering how people could become so consumed by authority that they stopped caring about fairness. I thought about Sandra. I thought about the board members who enforced rules they didn't follow themselves. Mostly I thought about all the neighbors who probably assumed I had actually done something wrong, because that's what official notices are designed to make people believe. The hearing took place in a municipal conference room that looked more like a classroom than a courtroom. Folding tables lined the front of the room. Residents filled several rows of chairs. Sandra arrived with the rest of the board carrying thick binders and wearing an expression that suggested victory was already guaranteed. When she saw me sitting beside Marcus, she gave a polite smile that somehow felt more insulting than open hostility. Mr. Walker, she said, I hope we can resolve this today. Marcus answered before I could. Oh, I think we will. For the first time all morning, Sandra's smile disappeared. And as the hearing officially began, neither she nor anyone else on that board had any idea that the documents sitting inside Marcus's briefcase were about to turn their entire case upside down. The hearing started exactly the way Sandra wanted it to. The board presented its complaints first. One by one, they described delivery activity, daytime office use, and what they called patterns consistent with commercial operations. Listening to them, you'd think I was running a call center out of my attic instead of answering emails for a software company. Sandra spoke confidently, almost casually, as if the outcome had already been decided. The board's responsibility is to protect community standards, she said. Residents expect us to enforce the governing documents consistently. I remember looking at Marcus when she said the word consistently. He didn't react. He just made a small note on a yellow legal pad. Then it was our turn. Marcus stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the front of the room carrying a single folder. Compared to the stacks of binders the HOA had brought, it looked almost empty. Let's begin with the basic facts, he said. He handed over my employment records, payroll documentation, and a letter from my employer confirming my position. The hearing officer reviewed the documents quietly. Marcus continued. Mr. Walker is not self-employed. He does not operate a company. He does not sell products. He does not receive customers. He does not conduct commercial transactions from his residence. Sandra shifted slightly in her chair. Marcus wasn't finished. Next came the city ordinance. The hearing officer adjusted his glasses and read the highlighted section. The room grew noticeably quieter. The language couldn't have been clearer. Remote employment without customer interaction did not constitute a home-based business. Period. End of discussion. I could actually see board members exchanging nervous glances. For the first time all morning, confidence began leaking out of the room. Then Marcus opened the second folder. The real one. Now, he said, let's discuss enforcement. He submitted records obtained directly from the HOA itself. Cheryl Benson's consulting company. Lisa Merrick's jewelry business. The tax preparation service operated by another board member. Document after document established the same fact. Multiple board members conducted genuine business activity from their homes. None had ever received warnings. None had ever been fined. None had ever been accused of violating community standards. Sandra's face tightened. One board member stared down at the table. Another suddenly became fascinated by papers that weren't even being discussed. Marcus let the silence sit for a moment before delivering the final blow. The board claims consistent enforcement. Their own records prove the opposite. They fined a resident for conduct that is not legally a business while ignoring actual businesses operated by board members themselves. The hearing officer looked over the documents for several minutes. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Finally, he looked directly at Sandra. Can you explain this discrepancy? What followed was one of the most uncomfortable things I've ever witnessed. Sandra tried. She really did. She talked about context, neighborhood concerns, resident complaints, board discretion, evolving interpretations. The more she spoke, the worse it sounded. Every answer seemed to create two new questions. Eventually, the hearing officer held up a hand and stopped her. Then he looked down at the ordinance one final time. Working remotely for an employer is not operating a business under city code, he said. Furthermore, the evidence presented suggests inconsistent enforcement of association rules. He paused, tapped his pen once against the desk, and delivered the sentence that ended everything. The violation is dismissed. All fines are rescinded. The association is directed to remove this matter from the resident's record immediately. Just like that, it was over. No dramatic speech. No shouting. No courtroom theatrics. Just a simple ruling based on facts. Yet somehow that made it even more satisfying. Sandra looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her chair. The board gathered their papers in complete silence. Marcus leaned over and quietly said, "Told you they were done." A few weeks later, I received a check covering the entire $820, including every fee they had added. Then something even more interesting happened. The HOA distributed a neighborhood-wide policy clarification acknowledging that remote employment alone would no longer be considered a prohibited business activity. In other words, they rewrote the policy because they had lost. Not long after that, 2 board members resigned before the next election cycle. Officially, their departures were unrelated. Unofficially, nobody believed that for a second. The board also spent thousands of dollars on legal fees defending a case they never should have started. All because they decided enforcing power mattered more than enforcing rules fairly. Looking back, the biggest lesson wasn't about HOAs or lawyers or hearings. It was about what happens when people become convinced that authority excuses hypocrisy. Rules only work when everyone follows them. The moment those making the rules place themselves above them, the entire system starts cracking. I never set out to fight my HOA. I never wanted to become the guy challenging the board. I just wanted to do my job in peace. But if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that bullies often count on silence more than power. The moment someone pushes back with facts, the whole story can change. So now I want to hear from you. Was the HOA simply trying to protect community standards, or was this obvious abuse of authority from the beginning? Have you ever dealt with selective enforcement, unfair fines, or people who expected rules for everyone except themselves? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this always spark debate. And if you enjoy real-life victories where facts beat power and common sense wins in the end, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who's had their own battle against an HOA.